What up, guys? So today's podcast, we're going to have Mike from BJJ After 40. He's another, jiu-jitsu content creator guy who's been making videos. I mean, he's been making videos since like I got started back.
He's an OG, man.
Yeah,
OG in grappling, OG in making videos.
He's been lingering around out there for a long time, but this is my first time chatting with him. Had a great conversation. A lot of good takeaways. If jiu-jitsu, like training jiu-jitsu for sustainability, for longevity is something that you're focused on, which I know a lot of us are, right? A lot of us like to compete, even me, like I like to compete sometimes, but even then I still like to train most of the time for longevity, where I can train like the pace that I'm doing for a long time. And, I can train and enjoy it because again, there's at a certain point where you just understand like that becomes the goal.
It's part of the thing you do, man.
Yeah. It's like, when I was younger and I was lifting, it was like, I just want to push numbers. Right. And I was doing powerlifting and strongman, and I'd gotten myself up to 250, weight wise. Right. Like just
beefy boy.
I was eating tons of food and was on the Mexican supplements. Right. And I was just going, right. And I was like, I'm going to get so strong. And then you're like, maybe lifting like this probably isn't sustainable, right? Because like, these kinds of weights, like putting 500 pounds on your back and doing squats, like probably not the best thing to do, right? So again, you adjust, lifting adjust and our training adjust. And so we get some ideas on adjusting training and things like that. If the subject is kind of interesting to you. And overall, it's a fun conversation. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. Charlotte's Web CBD is one of the premier companies that's out there with CBD. They are a third-party tested company to ensure the quality of the supplement that you're getting. I was just talking to one of my students this morning. There is a supplement out there that we actually got.
The fun one,
huh?
Yeah, the fun one.
Maybe.
Yeah. We're probably not going to mention them.
The one that looks like you're getting a pharmaceutical drug that comes in little vials. Yep. So that one we got propositioned to do it and get paid for it, whatever. And I remember looking at the proprietary blend, which first off, that's a big red flag. Proprietary blend, right? I saw that, I was like, yeah. And then looking at it, it was like almost $300. And you're looking at it, and you're like, what? There's like this. There's nothing in this. Is junk. It's like, I can't push this. One of my students is going to buy this, and like, this is terrible. So anyway, we never pushed it, right? And so again, I just don't like the supplement, but I do like Charlotte's Web supplement. I do like CBD oil. I think it's useful. I think it's very useful for, at least for me, from the standpoint of recovery and rest and that sort of thing. Again, we all deal with, sports-induced inflammation. It's what we're doing in training. We're tugging on joints. We're training hard, and we get sore. Well, it's one of those supplements to assist with the soreness, and at least for me. And so again, you can try it out for yourself. My encouragement to you is, if you have never tried Charlotte's Web's products, pick one of them that you like on their website at charlottesweb.com. And then whatever you find, use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. See what kind of effect it has on you. See if you like it, and then go from there. Also, thanks to our buddy Matt at Epic Roll. Matt is a jiu-jitsu practitioner, a black belt, fellow black belt that's in the space. It's in jiu-jitsu that is, making gear and things like that for jiu-jitsu practitioners. I think he makes a lot of cool gear and good quality stuff, great customer service. I like supporting his stuff because, one, he makes good stuff. I like getting my rash guards made through him because I think they're top notch. I love the fit and the feel of all of his rash guards and his no-gi gear. That said, he also is out there supporting a lot of up and coming young grapplers. And so I kind of like the mission that he's on, right? He's trying to make good stuff, and he's trying to support the grapplers that are up and coming on their way. And so I like to support that, and I like working with people I like, and I like Matt. So that said, if you guys want to check out his website to get some new gis, rash guards, shorts, whatever it might be, check out his website at epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Guys, if you want to support the podcast directly, you can also do that by going to our Patreon website with patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you get up there, you'll have an option to where you can subscribe and become a patron of the podcast, which will help support the podcast. And in return for your very inexpensive membership, we will deliver to you a ad-free version of the podcast, along with an access to a library of content that basically spans years, that has segments with each one of our guests that we've ever had, along with some stuff that Eugene and I have made specifically for that membership, including some warm-up routines, some narrated roles, some full-length recording of seminars, and you can get access to any and all of that there. Also, too, if you have questions that you would like answered, preferential treatment goes to our Patreon members. Guys, last but not least, if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, my daily email that I send out to the Chew Crew, is what I call it, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you'll get my daily email. And then on top of that, you'll also get access to a couple free resources that I give away. One is on an ebook on developing a game plan. The other one is on some drilling strategies to add a little focus to your jiu-jitsu training. And then from there, you'll get my daily email, which could be everything from books I'm reading, philosophical ideas I'm chewing on, stories from the mats, just fun checklists that I think are interesting or funny sometimes. And then anything and everything there. And then also too, from time to time, I will do certain specials and things like that that I don't do anywhere else. Like I had people do a survey recently, ask some questions, and I will be giving out prizes. Some of those prizes will be having them have a free private lesson with me. Some of them will be getting some free gear, things like that. So again, I do a lot of stuff in the email that I don't do elsewhere because of the fact that I like the medium of email a lot, because it's just like podcasting. I like podcasting a bit more because, you know, when you look at the statistics of like like when you're watching Instagram, people are just scrolling, right? And so I don't really like communicating in a lot of ways that way, because it's just too fast paced, it's frenetic, and everybody's just everywhere scrolling. Whereas when we're like doing an email, the emails I think are a little bit more fun, it's a little more intimate. And so I do a lot of stuff there that I don't do anywhere else. Also, just a heads up, guys, if anybody is interested, most of you guys know that we're doing the Jiu-Jitsu Open competitions, and we will now be adding a new Jiu-Jitsu Open competition to the ranks. This year, we'll be opening one in Chicago. Oh, cool. So November 2nd, I believe. I'll bring up my calendar right now.
I'll add it in. I'll add the link to all the Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. I'll add those in.
So we have November 2nd. November 2nd, we'll be doing a Jiu-Jitsu Open competition in Chicago. And then the following day, we'll be doing a seminar. So if you guys have never trained with me and you live in the Chicago area and you'd like to, you know, train with the Chewster for a few hours, get to maybe roll a little bit, maybe get a picture, whatever it is, then that'll be the time to do it. November 2nd and 3rd, 2024. So hope to see you guys there. Now let's get into the podcast with Mike. So, man, I've seen you around a little bit, and obviously your handle is like what BJJ is that over 40 or after 40?
After 40.
Yeah. After 40. Okay. And so like, obviously, you know, one of the things that I noticed is like, bro, you're flexible. You know what I mean? And so I was like, I wish I can move like that, you know? So I was curious, man, like, you know, when I was watching some of your movements and stuff like that, you possess a very good amount of dexterity and flexibility in your body. Was that something you always had, or was that something that you developed intentionally, or was it something kind of maybe a little bit of both? Maybe you were naturally a little flexible and you kind of just kept pushing it a bit and working on it.
I'd actually consider myself not like super flexible naturally in that sense. Like I've done martial arts my entire life. So since I was a kid, and as a kid, I was always trying to doing traditional martial arts, always trying to do the splits. Like that was sort of the gold standard. If you could do the splits, you were like, you know, Van Damme or something. I even had
all the Van Damme movies. It always had him in the splits, and he's there meditating.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, I remember even as a kid, I was doing Taekwondo, and like that's what I was trying to get my legs to splay out, and so I just wanted to sit like him between two chairs and just, you know, place my hands together.
But did you have a stretch rack? Do you remember that thing? You'd crank it out and make your legs move out. Do you remember that?
I remember that sucker. Yeah, the little torture device that they'd sell.
Yeah, I had one. That was when I was like 13 years old. It was like my first major purchase. Like I had to have my mom and dad write a check, send it off, order my stretch rack. And I would sit on that thing every day, crank it out and watch martial arts movies. It didn't actually do much for my splits because I'm not really built to do splits. I was never built like that. Yeah. But in my 40s, my early 40s, I started to have more knee problems. And I found that by opening and stretching my hips, it allowed for more dexterity with my knees. So it wasn't putting nearly as much pressure on my knees. So by opening up my hips, and that's where I think the best aspect of my flexibility is really my hips. Like if you think in Jiu-Jitsu punishes extension and rewards contraction. Right. So when we can keep our body tight and bound up, like if we're in a turtle position and we can stay really tight, that's going to be advantageous in that position. The same thing with our guard. If we can move our legs without and be able to rotate our hips fluidly, we're going to have more flexibility and our knees are going to last a lot longer. So for me, it's about saving my knees because as a tall, thin practitioner, I love triangle chokes.
Mhm.
And I recognized a few years ago that I can't just do triangles forever. My knees are going to take a beating. So by opening up my hips, I feel like I've added longevity with my knees. And I haven't had any knee surgeries at all. And I've been doing jiu-jitsu for, a while now.
So what kind of things did you do to like open up your hips and to sort of gain that increased flexibility and range of motion from your hips?
So one of the best stretches to do is literally get in like a turtle position and bring your knees apart, open up your knees, almost like a child's pose in yoga.
They call it like a frog pose or something?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. And getting it to the point where you can get your hamstrings to touch your heels. So you're tight in that position versus like you see people that are really inflexible. They get in turtle, they're really opened up in that position versus being really tight in that position. Just that stretch alone, if you just did that, especially for people that are pursuing triangles and omoplatas and things like that, they definitely want to have those hips opened up. And just doing that stretch alone is going to add a lot to it.
How often are you doing that? Like what's your frequency and time that you sit in that position?
That's my go-to. So pretty much, I think everybody should have 4 or 5 good stretches or movements that are going to play to your game of jiu-jitsu. So if you're like me, like a triangle guy, then I want my hips to be open. So whatever those type of techniques that you like to do that are going to be match the type of techniques that you're doing. So the techniques and the stretches kind of got to go together. I'll get in that stretch pretty much every time that I'm going to work out or I'm going to train. So I have my 4 or 5 go-to stretches. I always like my legs to be able to go over my head before I'm going to grapple with anybody. I don't want to be grappling and my legs get forced over my head for the first time that day by a partner training versus I can go through these stretches, make sure that my body is exactly the way I want it to feel before I'm going to roll with anybody. My hard and fast rule is I won't roll with anybody cold. Like I have to be warmed up. I'm not willing to put my body at risk like that. You probably feel the same way too, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. And plus like one of the things that I watched pretty early on, I remember seeing it happen twice. Someone who was a little bit older, this is when I was really young, and I could walk into a mat room and start rolling cold. But when I was younger in my early 20s, I remember multiple times within about a 2-year period, seeing one of our guys who was a little bit older, maybe around 41, 42, something like that, walk in and they would be running late because they were working or whatever. And then instead of like, we're already in the rolling session of class, and instead of taking a moment to just, get things warmed up a little bit, grease the groove a little bit, they just decided to jump into class and they're rolling. And then I've seen 2 really bad ACL tears that way. Because again, like you said, you're taking, your body when it's from a cold situation, you've probably been driving in a car and then you're taking out, now you're getting on the mat and you're going cold. It's just it's a recipe for disaster. And especially as you get older, you just, you don't have that, your body's not nearly as pliable, right? Like you got to get things moving a little bit. This is why, I'm sure you agree with this, right? Like as you get older, it's like once you're warmed up, you feel good.
You're good.
It's like, it's early on, if you're not warmed up, sometimes you're a little stiff, whatever. But then as soon as you get warmed up, you're fine. Then so that warm up becomes, I think, ever increasingly important as you get older, because that kind of gets you into, where you're actually, good. You're like an old Buick. You can't just like turn the car on and just start driving. You got to let the engine run for a little bit.
It's like when you wake up in the morning, you got to throw your legs off the side of the bed, let the engine kind of purr for a minute there, get it warmed up before I go to the next stage. So that goes back again to having especially for an over 40 practitioner, I'll be 55 next week. You've got to have your 4 or 5 stretches, 4 or 5 movements that your body recognizes. Your body's like, okay, we're doing jiu-jitsu right now. Not like even the stretches that necessarily that you're going to do at the gym, but it's like a cue in your brain to say, okay, it's jiu-jitsu time right now. So for my over 40 practitioners, I recommend you can't necessarily rely on your classroom, your professor, your teachers to do a warm-up for you. That's not, some schools don't even really do that much of a warm-up. So I think it's important to even schedule a little bit of time, even at home, even if it means you got to be one of those guys that wears his gi to class. That's fine. If it's you at home, taking like 20 minutes before you get in the car and actually do a few warm-up stretches so that your body is ready before you even walk into the school too.
Yeah, I agree. I think like a good point that you added was kind of like get your mind in the right spot. Like, all right, this is kind of my ritual before I start training. It kind of gets everything kind of firing, get yourself in the right headspace.
Yes, I love that. So when I walk into my school, I always do a little bow when I walk into the door. I never ask my students to bow or do anything like that. And in fact, I really feel like you shouldn't really have to bow to a person, place, or thing. So
Sure.
what I bow to is clearing the calculator. I'm clearing out the calculator. I even say in my head to myself, I have this little cue. I'll bow. Even when I came in just a little while ago, I bowed and I said Jiu-Jitsu time. So it's a reminder in my brain. It's like, it's time for Jiu-Jitsu now. This is what we're doing right now. And it helps me clear out the calculator. And it's great for students too, to have those little cues to remind yourself it's Jiu-Jitsu time. Because one of the values that I think that everybody agrees upon is that when you walk into a school and you train, it allows you to put everything else behind you for a moment. It allows you to clear out that calculator, to get all that muddled stuff out of your brain. Maybe you got into an argument with someone before you walked out the door. You don't need to bring that onto the mats. And for us as instructors who run a school, I have to remind myself, they don't care. Those kids do not. The 5-year-old that's coming to my class doesn't care that I'm having a shitty day.
Yeah.
You're right. Like, I need to give that kid a great class no matter what. That's my responsibility as being a black belt, no matter what, that I can put my personal stuff aside and Jiu-Jitsu time when it's time. And so the stretches can be a good cue for that too.
That's right. Yeah, having basically little rituals for yourself to get yourself ready to do that thing. That's similar to, I remember in like Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, he's talking about like basically having cues that then set up habits and then reward systems, right? And so like, every habit that you have typically has a cue that triggers that the activity that you're getting into that then leads to whatever the reward is. And for a lot of us, right, like when we train, the reward is maybe we hit a technique, or just sometimes sometimes it's that after training feeling where you're done and you're like, I feel great. I'm cleared out. Yeah, right. You feel amazing. You have the endorphin rush. It's like you said the bowing part, and it made me laugh. I'm the same way. I don't know about your gym. I came from a wrestling background, and so again, wrestling's all about like, you come in.
They don't bow in wrestling.
Yeah, right. We don't bow. You train hard, but you don't like. It's not overly strict.
Yes,
right.
Yes, it's different in that sense.
And I've been to some gyms where it's like very strict on like lots of little things. And even in one of my students just yesterday sent me some video of some guy who was like, if you're kind of leaning back like on the mats in class, like it was sort of acting like it was disrespectful and like you should sit up straight on. I was like, bro, I was like, I'm the most disrespectful student ever then, because I do that shit all the time, right? Like,
You're like me. I think probably some people would be horrified if they saw me teach sometimes. I swear sometimes when I teach, not in the kids' class, but I
swear
in the adult class. It's just, I grew up on the East Coast. I say swear words, I feel like it's the privilege of being an adult. Once you're 21, you can swear.
Yeah.
So, I'm not big on a lot of those things. I don't have pictures of people in my school that people have to bow to and stuff like that. I think some of that stuff gets a little weird. And I think it gets, and it's, whatever, people like to do in their school, that's their own thing. But I'm not into all that stuff. I like it to be about Jiu-Jitsu and just train.
Yeah, and I think if you get different strokes for different folks, right? So if you go to one of the gyms and you like all that very much like bowing and having to call people master, professor, sensei, or professor, sensei, whatever, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like at the most, if you want to call me something, call me coach, right? Like that's fine. But most people call me by Chewy, right? My name. But for me, like my whole thing is, and I think it goes back to what you're talking about there, is like just a second ago, like I'm trying to provide a place that like I want to be a part of, which is I want an escape from all the silly stuff. Cause you go to work and you go to your normal day to day and you're dealing with all that kind of stuff already. It's nice to come to a place where we can kind of like just turn the brain off. We can be with people and we don't have to be going through this, like, we have to be overly professional or overly this. We can take off like all the rigidity that we put on ourselves with our social masks through society on a daily basis. We can let go of all that shit and we can just say, let's be here like human to human. Let's train. Let's get after it together and let's dump out whatever we've got bottling up, whatever kind of stress we have. We can just leave it with the sweat on the mats. And then we can go back to our day, to our families, to our wives, to husbands, to our jobs and everything else. But be that escape for, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever a day that you're there at the gym.
And that's really, really important. And what you said, taking that off, and you literally take it off when you walk into a jiu-jitsu school, whether it's gi or no gi, you're putting on a different persona, a different mask, and you get to be kind of whoever you want. What's funny is I don't even know most of my students' jobs. I have no idea what most of them do. I have people that I've known that have trained with me for 5, 6 years, 7 years since the beginning of my school. I have no idea what they do for a living. And I purposely, unless someone wants to talk about that, I don't bring it up, because I want this to be an escape for them. I don't want them to feel like they have to come here and now talk about work, or come here and talk about other things that maybe they don't want to talk about. Maybe they just want to be here. I've had students, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, where I've taught a private lesson one time and a guy came in, and I could tell he was having some stuff going on. He seemed really bummed and, sad and stuff. And part of me wanted to like dole out some, black belt wisdom to him. You know what I did? I kept my mouth shut and I taught him jiu-jitsu and I rolled with him. And then we talked for a minute after. And I think that just giving him the technology of jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu experience was enough, instead of me having to add even more to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most people, they've got to think their problems through. And, I think that a lot of times when you're rolling, I mean, this has been for me, like sometimes if I'm dealing with some stuff mentally, well, then I'll go to the gym, because if you think about it, like a lot of our stress that we deal with on a day-to-day basis now, because of the way that modern society is like, it's mental. It's all mental stress comes in, but it has a physical manifestation, right? Like, you watch all you have to do is watch a young child, and something mentally happens. You tell them no about something, whatever, and watch what they do. You see temper tantrums, they throw a fit, whatever. So their bodies are expressing that negative energy mentally, right? Now, as adults, we get taught not to throw temper tantrums, which is good, because we don't want to have adults like throwing temper tantrums. Although sometimes you look on, you look around, you're like, maybe some adults never learned that lesson, right?
Yeah,
but that's a different lesson. But we've got to. But the thing is, we've got to deal with this stuff physically. And so sometimes when you can have that physical release, that escape valve, if you will, through training, right? Through the physical exertion, through the focus that we're doing, where we're basically getting away from all that other stuff, it gives you some space away from whatever it is that you're dealing with, then to sort of give you some distance to look at it from a different perspective. Even if, like you said, no one told you what to do, you just had some space away from it, and you got to get rid of those negative feelings through your body, so you could look at it a little bit more objectively, maybe a little bit more clear-headed.
I totally agree. And I think if you don't do that, the pressure builds up. And what happens when pressure builds up too much? It needs a release.
Something bursts.
It's going to burst, and it's going to come out in other ways. So people that don't have something like jiu-jitsu in their life, they may have to resort to, losing their temper on their kids or their wife or their spouse, or, acting like
road
an
rage
asshole
or
in
something.
public.
Yeah.
Going into rage in public, or just kind of being a dick. You know what I mean? Like just not having, any compassion or empathy for anyone else but yourself. So I think it's important to have a way that you can show that empathy for yourself is something like jiu-jitsu. And sometimes it's just the rolling. I'm sure I have days where I just need to come in and roll with my students. I just want to roll like myself. I'm experiencing something in my life, and I need that outlet. And I love that opportunity to be able to just go and roll sometimes and just get that shit out of my system.
That's right.
Yeah. I think that's like, as coaches, like creating that environment, whether it's some people are attracted to that more formal environment versus more informal, however you want to think about it. But I think you're giving them space to like have that release also. And I think you when you go and you have all this stuff, like trying to problem solve, it's kind of like sleeping on it, except you use jiu-jitsu to give yourself that space. Like that, if you have a problem, it's like you keep thinking about it and you can't figure it out, can't really get your way about it. But then it's like, give yourself some space, like Chewy, like you said, but we're giving it mental space and physical space, because you're doing something that you're focusing on jiu-jitsu. And if you're not there, if you're mentally kind of somewhere else, you're going to kind of have a rough day on the mats, even though, but that's still even better though. Even having a rough day on the mats is better than no time on the mats.
At least you have the outlet. And so I feel like what we're talking about is it gives you perspective. Space gives you perspective. Just like when you're grappling somebody, sometimes you need to pause and side control for a sec and just see what you have in front of you. I always remind my students, this is a great lesson for white belts. I call it the 2 critical questions. What position am I in and where am I going? And if you think about extending that same metaphor to your life, what position am I in right now? Where am I right now? Where am I standing right now? And where am I going to orient myself to next? Where do I want to go next? And sometimes it's just taking one step forward and then orienting again and going, oh shit, that wasn't a good step. I got to go in that direction now. So sometimes that space gives us that perspective enough to like say, pause for a second, say, what position am I in? Where am I going? Where white belts, they get caught up in that cyclone of chaos instead of just pausing for a moment. And just, if nothing else, am I in guard, side, mount, or back? What position am I in? And where do I want to go to next?
That's a cool way of looking at it from like the sort of the the jiu-jitsu rule that like transcends to your life, right? That's a good way of looking at it. Thinking of that, I remember like one of the earliest sort of things that was drilled into me, especially for when I was competing a lot when I was younger. My coach would always he was trained almost like every time I would practice, I was trained to take like 2 big deep breaths. So every time I would like get to side control and I would hold it, I would go. And I would and just doing that alone would like all of a sudden relax me and be like, okay, what's going on? Opposed to like you said, being in that like sort of manic state of like, I got to keep going. And you look at a lot of white belts early on, and a lot of times they'll get to like side control, right? They just pass the guard. And instead of like solidifying the position and taking a moment to like, hey, look, you just did all this work passing guard. Let's breathe a little bit, rest, and let's catch our breath. Now, what are we going to do next? They start moving, and they'll start moving so fast that like in a competition, they never even get their points. They never hold the position, then the person escapes. And I think that kind of going back to the off the mat side of it, a lot of us do that, right? We're constantly moving around so frantically that we're not even thinking about like, where am I?
We're not strategizing.
Right. Where am I trying to go with this? And so taking a little bit of time to breathe, to back off, and like sometimes taking like a vacation, away from things, or doing something to get out of your normal habits or rhythms can sometimes, like you said, give you that space, very much like a good roll in the gym away from your problems could be.
And it's the same thing from a defensive perspective too. Like you're stuck in a position. How are you going to react to that right now? Are you going to give up? You could do that. You could just tap out and tap the position. That's kind of sucky. No one wants to do that. Or you can just reorient yourself right now, evaluate, where am I? Where am I going? Well, I always tell my students, this is a good way to say it. If I can breathe, then I'm alive. If I'm alive, I can think. If I can think, I can problem solve. Okay. If I can breathe, then I'm alive. So that's a good start. I can breathe. I'm being crushed right now. Well, I can still breathe a little bit. Well, if I can breathe, then I'm alive. If I'm alive, I can think. If I can think, I can problem solve. So it gets you back on that path of like having a little bit more perspective now and say, okay, I can figure my way out of this. Because as we know, from a defensive position, sometimes it just takes 2 little turns of your hip, have just a little tiny bit of space that pries open a little bit more space and a little bit more. And the next thing you know, everything's changed.
So going back to some of the things that us as older jiu-jitsu practitioners deal with. I'm not old. I'm 39, so I'm getting there. But
you're at the cusp, my friend.
Right. But I've been training since I was like grappling since I was like 14.
He's
so
got
like
some mileage.
I may not be an old model, but I've got some mileage, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious for you. Like, first off, one, how old are you when you started jiu-jitsu?
So I started in 96. So I'm going to be 55 next week. Wow. So I don't know, whatever the
been a couple years,
about
right?
27. So I was, and even I say I started in 96, but I was already grappling for a couple of years before I even started. So it's been like, it's been almost 30 years.
Cool. So, you've been going back to that breathing, aliving, and then problem solving. You've been alive for 55 years, right? So
Correct.
You've been going at this stuff for 55 years.
Yes.
So with that, how has your training changed? Like basically your rolling training from, like when you're in your 20s and 30s, right? And then now that you're 55, right? Like how much do you roll these days? And basically how do you train, but still mitigate the risk of injury? Because again, that's all of us, right? We're trying to, at a certain point, we're training for longevity. We're trying to stay active on the mats, but at the same time, not go so far that we injure ourselves.
So I always look at it like I always want to be a martial artist. And so when I think of the martial side of it, the word martial means warrior or warlike. Yeah. So on the martial side of it, you have flexibility, strength, and speed. Okay. When I was a younger practitioner, that's where I drew most of my jiu-jitsu from, was either trying to use some kind of combination of that. So I would consider myself to be kind of an athletic person. So I relied far more on the martial side of things, the athleticism side of things for a long time in my jiu-jitsu, probably up to black belt. And I got my black belt in 2014. So the last 10 years of jiu-jitsu has been focused more on the art side of jiu-jitsu, leverage, timing, and technique, and using more of that aspect of my jiu-jitsu and trying to rely a lot less on the physicality of it, because I realize the physicality has a diminishing return. If I'm going to use athleticism, I can't, first of all, I can't hang with the 20-year-olds that way. It doesn't work. I've tried to, I could roll with someone that's younger than me, and I could maybe tap them out real quick, that's fine. But then I got to do it again, and then I got to do it again and again. But if I can slow things down, if I'm training with the gi on, trying to slow things down by gripping and controlling their legs and slowly advance in my position versus taking these quick bursts, that's far more better on my body in the long run, and I can grapple a lot more. Now, in terms of like how many days can I roll? Well, I have to ask my body that every week. It's different from week to week. Some weeks I can roll like, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, which would be kind of a lot for me. 4 days a week of intense rolling would be a lot. I have like a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I'm going to roll one day, there's got to be the next day, a good day of recovery after that. I can't really roll hard 2 days in a row. It's just too much for my body. So I always try to pair my recovery with my training. And then my lifestyle has to always be about precovery, not just recovery, because recovery is more about how you respond after the training versus how I'm living my life. So some weeks I might only roll one day. I might only roll a couple rounds one week because I teach and I do jiu-jitsu every day and I teach privates every day. I've got to sort of balance all of that out as well. So I think it's going to be different for everyone. And especially when we're talking about someone who is, let's say they're 45 and they're starting jiu-jitsu. They're not already a black belt. They're just starting jiu-jitsu and they're a white belt now. It's a lot harder, right? So I think for a white belt that's 45 years old and maybe a little bit out of shape, maybe you train 2 days a week. That's a perfect start for somebody. I think, yeah, you're going to want to train like 6 days a week. I would love to roll 6-7 days a week. That sounds amazing. But I realized at 55 that it's not sustainable for my body. And so I have this, you've heard of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, sustainable. Keep it simple, sustainable. I want it simple, my workouts to be simple, and I need them to be sustainable in the sense that it's got to outlive the present moment. Whatever I do today, it's got to outlive the present moment.
What's your, so you have a tough training day. What's kind of your recovery look like? And what are some lifestyle things that you've kind of implemented that you think are like standards that you have to have, whether it's diet or some type of strength training, whatever it is? What's kind of some standards that you have to implement to keep yourself on the mats?
Got to have strength training. Like that's one of the things I've really brought back in the last like 10 years or so is making sure that I'm doing some sort of strength training. It can't be anything that's going to interfere with my jiu-jitsu. It's got to support my jiu-jitsu. It can't be something that like when I go and lift now, my elbows hurt, my shoulders hurt, and I can't roll now because my body hurts. So keeping it simple and sustainable might be if you just start with like kettlebell swings, do that maybe 3 days a week, keep it simple and sustainable. I'm one of those, I think most jiu-jitsu guys tend to be sort of black and white. They're all in. They want to do it all, right? Like I want to lift 6 days a week. I want to get myself in the best shape ever. But, you can't over fertilize your fields either. If you put too much fertilizer in, you're going to kill the soil. So I can't lift and train every single day. So I find that 3 days a week, about 30 minutes for me for lifting, builds the armor that I need for training. And I think of it like armor, like I need armor on my body to protect my body from jiu-jitsu.
And I think a lot of it too depends on, because I agree with you 100%. Like I'm all about like training out. It's like, unless maybe I get the itch to go compete and there's like a period of time where I'm going to train in kind of an unsustainable fashion to get ready for this competition. I'm going to push it a little harder. Most of the year is basically cruising at this like nice pace where I can maintain this for essentially forever. And then, but I think though it changes depending on when you started. So for instance, like, talking about a 45-year-old getting into it, that's difficult because you're starting off with a body that's a little bit older. And if you're out of shape, then that's going to be a problem. Whereas, when you start grappling, your body takes a lot of bumps and bruises because you don't know how to fall properly. You don't know how to, you don't know all the right responses. And sometimes it just, you watch like a brand new woman comes in and trains and like, she looks like she's been like, has leopard sprints all over,
right?
Just everywhere because her body's not used to being grabbed that much. Right. And so, you take this initial, your body goes through this initial hardening process when you start grappling, and that's an easier process when you're younger, much more difficult as you get older, right? And so there's that. And then like lifting is the same thing. when you start lifting, if you've never lifted before, right? Like you said, it should be something really like easy. Like you shouldn't be going crazy because you're probably going to be so sore and banged up if you try to push it at all. And so you've got to be very like mindful about that, you know, whereas like, say like me, I've been lifting again since I was a kid. Like I can go through and do like a pretty like good, like hard workout that would cripple someone for the next day. But for me, it's like, this is pretty okay. Just like with rolling, I can roll at a clip that maybe a newbie couldn't, because I've just been doing this stuff my entire life. So I think it really goes back to what you were saying with like the sustainability and the longevity part of it, right? Is like, and again, this is something everybody says, but a lot of times we're too focused on being like this A-type person to push. We've got to tune back into our body. How's everything feeling right now? You feeling good? Like, can we push this? If not, like, let's just take a day off. And it doesn't make you a wimp. It doesn't make you a weakling. It doesn't make you unproductive to take that day off to rest, because you need it. But I think that a lot of times people sort of equate taking a rest day, taking a recovery day as like a bad thing. And there's even people, there's goofballs on the internet that are like, I don't ever take a rest day or whatever, you know. And I'm like, well, first off, you're probably lying, but let's say that you don't. Well, then like give it a few years. Let me know how your body feels.
Yeah, come see me at 55.
That's right, right? Come see me in your 50s. Come see me in your late 40s when you're training with young people trying to take your heads off and you never take a day off. Let me know how that goes for you.
And I think you can adjust the volume of how you define your training that day. So maybe you do go to class, but maybe you roll in a different way. You say, well, would you mind when I roll with you today that we just roll position today, or we just flow through some moves, or we go a little bit lighter? So maybe you adjust the volume on some days. You don't maybe miss class. You still go to class and you can run through the techniques and move your body. That's a big part of recovery. There's this great little acronym, ARITA, like a name, ARITA. Active recovery is the answer. So when my students say to me, what should I do before recovery? What should I do tomorrow? Active recovery is the answer. You need to move your body. You need to move. What does that mean? Well, maybe go for a walk at the park. Go with your spouse for a walk. Go for a bike ride. Go stretch for 20 minutes. Go do something with your body. I like taking an Epsom salt bath. I already took my Epsom salt bath today before this call. I did like a 30-minute hot bath. That took my body and it reset my body. It's super relaxing. The magnesium sulfate is really good for your body. It gets absorbed into the bath and the bath into your body. It feels good. It's relaxing. It's a great time to even practice jiu-jitsu. Go through some reps in your mind. Your brain does not know the difference between you mentally practicing and physically practicing. It's better, obvious, if you can physically practice, but just going through mental reps can be helpful too. So you can start to redefine how you practice jiu-jitsu. It doesn't always have to be that when you go to class, I've got to like do the entire class and then I've got to stay for 30 minutes and roll and do this entire crazy thing every single time I roll or every time I train. It could be different each time and approach it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think rest is something that people can think of as not doing anything.
Correct.
Rest is actually best utilized in a way of movement, a recovery type way. So like you said, going for a walk, doing some gentle mobility work, maybe even stretching, doing some light things that, you know, get those joints moving. Because I'm a physical therapist. In the physical therapy world, I find myself always saying motion is lotion.
Ooh,
I always
like
say that all the time. All the time. Because you see people with like arthritis or like stiffness, and it's like, what happens when we wake up in the morning? We're like stiff and achy, and then we get moving and the body loosens up. Same thing on the mats. We feel a little stiff and we start flowing through some techniques and you feel better. So I think movement is so important, because if you stop moving, you're not letting that blood circulate and all those joints, the fluid in the joints not getting moved around. So I think some type of movement that's low impact, even like swimming, could be really beneficial.
Ooh, yes, like aqua therapy, walking in the water, anything like that is great. Yes.
Yeah. You sound like some old farts,
man.
Well,
you know, there's another cool thing to think about, and this is like me, like, you know, I've always been, the last several years, I've been really like mindful about the way that I use like tech stuff, because I think like a lot of the tech companies are evil, and they're just, you know, it's like I think it was Bill Maher who said it. It's like they're just the tobacco companies, but they wear like t-shirts. It's like, you know, they're basically destroying children's attention span and like, you know, making our society hate one another over nothing, but, you know, just whatever. Just, I think it's terrible in a lot of cases, but there's some good stuff too. But But that said, I've been really mindful about using it because I understand that these companies literally are just doing whatever they can to steal my eyeballs and steal my attention, and they care not how my life proceeds. And so that said, I read a book recently called Digital Minimalism by a guy named Cal Newport, and he talks in the book, which again, he talks about like ideas on structuring your tech time, which I was like, I'm already doing that. That's good. But he gives some ideas if you guys haven't done that. It's a good book to read. And he talks about some studies and stuff they've done. But one of the ideas was he was talking about high quality leisure activity. So again, like, you know, he's talking about, okay, you have this time that you don't like, let's say if you have some time where you're like, okay, I'm not doing anything here, right? Well, don't waste it like screwing off on your phone and scrolling to death, right? Like go do something. And, you know, you can structure like activities that, you know, again, they're high quality, right? So for instance, like something that me and my wife do, we'll go out inside and garden. So we'll be out in the garden, we're planting flowers, planting vegetables, doing that kind of stuff. And, you know, that's movement, right? I'm out in the sun, I'm out in the dirt, I'm moving around, doing movement. And like, you know, that'll be like usually a rest day or like sort of a relaxing sort of thing mentally. Because you're away from your phone, you're moving with the earth, you're outside in nature, that kind of stuff. And, you know, or maybe like you could work on something else. Like you said, you could do some yoga and work on your stretching, right? And like work on that aspect of your body, but doing something like you said, or go walk with your family, you know, walk with your family, walk with a friend, have a good conversation, something like that. There's lots of high quality opportunities there that don't involve, like you said, resting where you're just binge watching Netflix or scrolling on your phone and like wasting your life away.
Sure. Absolutely.
So my wife and I use something called the Pomodoro Method. Have you ever heard of that before?
I haven't. What is that?
So Pomodoro is an Italian word. It means tomato. And think of like a tomato kitchen timer. So this is actually something that college students use a lot for studying. And I was able to actually write a book in the last year. It's going to actually be out here soon, the BJJ After 40 Survival Guide. And I was able to write this book. I have 4 kids. I have 2 teenagers and a set of 4-year-old twins. And then, you know, all of my businesses and stuff like that. And I was able to write a book in the last year and using the Pomodoro method. So the way that this method works is you set your timer, could be a kitchen timer, but could be just a timer on your phone, 25 minutes of uninterrupted, undisturbed time that you're going to work on something. And it could be something as simple as working on yourself. I'm going to go do a Pomodoro right now for 25 minutes, and I'm just going to take a mindful walk outside. Or I'm going to go walk to the park and stretch for 25 minutes uninterrupted. I'm going to put my phone away and I'm not going to look at my phone. If there's an interruption, unless it's an actual emergency, I'm not going to tend to it until my 25 minutes are done. And then at the end of your 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break and you reevaluate. You say, well, am I going to do 25 more minutes now? Or am I going to take a break and maybe do something else now? So you start at creating these atomic habits. You've heard of that book, Atomic Habits. You start creating these atomic habits in small little, again, sustainable, simple and sustainable increments. And it could be 25 minutes to work out. A lot of my lifting sometimes is I'll just show up 30 minutes before my kids' classes start. I have the door locked and I do my lifting at the school. So I've sabotaged myself in a way to have what I need here at the school if I want to get a 25-minute lift in. And your Pomodoros could be like anything, like what you're talking about. It could be a walk in the park. It could be a meditation. It could be schedule my tech time on my phone to go through some of my Jiu-Jitsu notes, or I'm going to do, everybody always talks about note taking in Jiu-Jitsu. Nobody does it. So maybe it's a time to actually like go through your notes or take notes, things like that. So the Pomodoro method is super effective because you can get a ton of stuff done in these little tiny sprints that add up over time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I followed something similar. It was a guy named Eugene Schwartz. He was like a marketer, copywriter guy back in the day. And so like his was 33 minutes, 33 seconds. That was his thing. I would just set 30 minutes, right? I was like, all right, half an hour, you know, and set that half an hour. But I like that method of doing it because, you know, again, sometimes it's like at the end of the day, like for instance, with your training, it's all just a drop in the bucket, right? So like whether it's a good day or a bad day, it's all a drop in the bucket. And again, you're not really worried about how good you're getting over the next like couple of days or weeks. It's like you're thinking about years in this thing. Like, how good am I getting over the next couple of years? Because that's really what matters. And in our lives, it's kind of the same way, right? All of our habits are just these drops in the buckets, right? And they add to whoever we're going to become in the next few years, or being added, being changed by these little habits. Each one's a drop in the bucket. And so if there's something that you're trying to do, if you do the habit that you know is going to help you, right? Like if you like, for instance, like you said, if you meditate, you're trying to become better at meditating, or you're stretching, you want to be more flexible. So you start stretching, you set the timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to stretch. regardless of how that stretching session goes, you know, there's value in it inherently. And so when you're done with it and the timer goes off, you feel sort of satisfied, just like you got done training. Even if it was the worst session ever, you went out and got your face smashed and you feel all shitty about it, you're still glad you did it because you know that like you did what it takes to become better at that thing. So at the end of the roll, there's a satisfaction. At the end of the training, there's a satisfaction to that. So I imagine with the Pomodoro Method, when you're writing the book, right? Some days, again, I write a lot of stuff too. So when you're writing, some days kind of they're rough, some days are great, but even on those rough days, once that timer goes off and you still did your writing, there's still a satisfaction to having that timer go off and be like, I did it for this time. I did what I set out to do.
And it does it in this really sustainable way. Because when I first started writing, I was like, okay, I tell my wife, okay, babe, I want you to watch the kids. I'm going to go downstairs to the office, to the writing room to write. Like it was this whole big ritual around it. And it would feel like that. And I would go sometimes and I'd get into a good flow state or whatever. And sometimes it would go too long. Like I'd be going like on an hour and I haven't peed and I'm thirsty and like my legs are cramping up. And I've gotten so far in my writing, so far away from where I started it from, that sometimes the writing would be as good because I got so far away from it without any breaks. But if I take that 25 minutes, that short burst, 5-minute rest, go to the bathroom, get some water, stretch my legs, move around a little bit, and then go back to it and pick it up from where I was, I get much better writing out of it too. And I think most things you're going to find are probably going to be better in those short bursts versus these big giant kind of marathons.
Yeah, I think kind of what I take from it is, number one, you're building a habit. So you're building a consistent habit and you're also more efficient. Like, you know, you have 25 minutes to really put everything into this thing, focus on it. And there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? If it goes an hour, hour and a half, you may get distracted or your mind starts wandering. So I think like you just have a set time. I'm going to do this thing right now for this amount of time. You have these boundaries around it and it allows you, I think, to just really be more efficient in what you're doing. And then if you're like, hey, I am in a flow state, I'm feeling really good, I'm gonna take this little break, I'm gonna hop right back in. And some days you do 25 minutes, like, this is not looking good, I'm done, I'm gonna go do something else. So I think it's just it's a great way to kind of know where you're at too and kind of check in with yourself.
And if you think about applying that same thing to your students when you're drilling moves, how many times you're teaching a private lesson, the guy's doing great, he's doing great, oh man, technique looks really good, then what starts to happen? Everything starts to degrade, it dips on the other side. It's natural, it's that bell curve, it has to happen that way. So it's also important to know like when to stop drilling. You always hear the 10,000 rule, you have to do 10,000 repetitions in order to achieve automaticity with something, so it becomes muscle memory. But it's 10,000 deliberate repetitions. It's not just 10,000 times doing something, just unmindfully doing the movements. That's not going to serve you. So again, those short bursts are always going to be better.
Yeah. And it's something I've noticed in like seminars, right? Like if I'm teaching a seminar, I'll structure like some breaks in between, like sometimes 10, 15 minutes, right? Just to give them a minute to like wipe, clean, whatever. And, you know, there was times where I may have had more stuff that I wanted to go over, but you could just look at the room and they're done. You know what I mean? They're starting to trail off. It's like, all right, we're done. Let's start some rolling and stuff like that. And, you know, or whatever we're going to do that day. Cause it's like, otherwise the rest of this is just going to be for nothing. You're not going to be able to remember any more of this.
How did you, like your coaching style, how did you kind of develop that? Was there anyone that kind of influenced you, or where did you draw some of this inspiration, some of these kind of ways that you implement your coaching?
Just, you know, honestly, probably from everyone. I think I get something from every person I try to. Like whenever I go to a seminar or learn something from someone that I haven't learned before, I look at how they teach the technique. I look at how they present the technique. So I always try to learn something from somebody every time I'm exposed to someone that I get to train with. And a lot of it was through my own trial and error. Like, you know, I realized when I was 42 that I needed to change my jiu-jitsu. Something needed to change about it because I was hurt all the time. I was constantly injured. But when I go back then and I look at my jiu-jitsu, I was really drawn a lot from that martial side and focusing way too much on an athleticism-based jiu-jitsu. So slowing things down over the years has helped a lot. And it's forced me to like really step back and have a wider perspective with my jiu-jitsu. And it's interesting because my wife is 15 years younger than me. She's also a black belt as well. And I met her when she was like 20 years old. And she started doing, I met her through martial arts, but she started training jiu-jitsu with me then. So she trained for like up to all of her ranks through me. So she's always been doing BJJ after 40, even long before she was 40 years old. And she really hasn't had like injuries or anything like that. And she's gone through, you know, having 4 kids, getting her black belt and all of that as well. So she's a great testament to, like, you're 39, to embracing the culture of BJJ after 40, even before you're 40, and implementing these different best practices into your training before you are 40 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think of it as like, you know, I have gears because I need them, right? So like I have, you know, for instance, you know, it's like feeling it out. If I'm rolling with someone, a lot of times, especially younger guys now, like there's students that I have that are very athletic, very strong, whatever. And so I will have to sort of yield to that. And I won't be able to go like head to head with them. And I'm gonna have to back off a little bit, and learning how to control things in a much more methodical way where you're using technique opposed to strength. And, you know, the biggest challenge, which, you know, I'm starting to kind of get over, is doing that in no-gi. And so like in the gi, it's very easy. Just I can grab on the handles and I can slow you down. But in the no-gi, I've noticed that, like, I've been working on stuff specifically, you know, for like more of like an older guard passing style, where I can slow things down. I can put people in a position where there's a lot less movement going on, because a lot of times people think of no-gi as this fast-paced dynamic situation, which it can be, but there are ways to slow it down. But that's been like the one that I've been focused on. But again, the thing that I've noticed is, like, you eventually, if you train long enough, you will come to this realization, no matter what, where you physically, like, the pace, the person, whatever, because we're constantly becoming someone new. And the problem is our ego gets wrapped around like this version of ourselves at some point. And then, like, every so often, it's like we have to do this sort of like software, hardware update. Like, hey, like the firmware's got to be updated, right? Like, you know, we're becoming an older model and an older version. And so we need to update to that. And we're like, I remember being that, I think it was around like 37, 38. You know, I had been used to going at a certain pace in my 30s, which I adjusted to for my 20s. And I remember thinking, like, man, I'm getting tired. And God, I'm getting really sore after training now that I'm not used to doing this. And I had to start to adjust my pace. And even I had to adjust the amount of days I was rolling. I used to be able to roll 5-6 days a week, no problem. Now it's like, you know, I got to be mindful of it, and maybe I can't roll that much all the time. And so I think that, again, this kind of goes back to the part of like jiu-jitsu, and I think you probably agree with this, is that as we're doing this, part of it is that we're getting really in tune with our body, right? So like learning to listen to what our body's telling us through training. Just like as you train, you get really good about sensing someone's body movement, and you can feel where your body is in space. You also, as you get more experience with it, you can kind of feel where your body's at. You probably, I'm sure, as long as you've been doing martial arts, you can probably notice when you're getting ready to get sick, or when you're just slightly off, right? You're so in tune with your body that you already know these things. And so it can kind of give you the sort of the signal to say, I need to back off, right?
Yeah, and I find that too. Like, I can, if I'm the one person in my family that almost never gets sick, and everybody is like, "What's your secret to that?" The second I feel like it's coming on, I deal with it. So if I feel like, oh, my throat's getting a little bit sore, I go and rest and I sleep, and I try to sleep it off, and I don't really get that sick. And I do think that when you train jiu-jitsu for a long time, you are very tuned into your body. You have to be. It's a physical martial art, so you are very tuned into your body, and it's important to have that relationship with your body. And I think for older practitioners, it's something that's a worthwhile skill, is to really, and meditation can help with that as well, really tuning into your physical body and having that conversation with your body. If you're like, my knee hurts after I'm training, why is my knee hurting after I'm training? And how are you going to address that now? Versus like, oh, that's my bad knee. And you're like literally calling it your bad knee. I'm sure your knee doesn't want to be called the bad knee, you know? So even just on that very like quantum level, like having that conversation with your body.
I think, like, I was just, as you're explaining that, I'm like, when you have a check engine light in your car, or like lights in your car that start lighting up, you usually, like, I'll ignore it. But now, as an older grappler, you can't ignore those. You're like, all right, what's that? I got to figure that out. I got to get to the bottom of it. I'm going to adjust, or I'm going to take care of it. So I think, well, because if you let something like that linger, the recovery could be even longer. You may be off the mats longer. You may not be at your best. You know, it might take you longer to kind of get back to that point. You know, dealing with injuries or kind of bumps and bruises as a young grappler, you can get over that pretty quick. You can literally just work through it, no problem. But now it's like, if I don't give it the proper attention, it could keep me off the mats or get worse. So I think that stuff's so much more important now.
100%. I just went through a hernia surgery a couple of months ago, like 4 months ago, and I had 2 hernias repaired. And if you've never had that done, it's a pretty sucky surgery. Like the first 3 or 4 days is pretty much like hell. You actually start to think that you're probably never going to be able to do jiu-jitsu again, because you can't even like sit up in bed. You can't move your stomach. Your core is just completely wrecked. But then, you know, I'm rolling now. It's been 4 months and I'm rolling normal now and fine now. But it was such a great lesson too, like being grounded for literally, it felt like my parents grounded me and stuck me in my room for 4 months. And it felt like that the first few days, like, oh my God, this is going to suck so bad. I should have never gotten this surgery. Like, look at me now. I wasn't that bad before, but I've been training with 2 hernias for about 4 years now. And it's really limited my grappling quite a bit. So, you know, addressing that stuff before it becomes a chronic problem in yourself is really, really important. And when you're healing from something, from an injury, it's like a bridge that you have to cross. You can't shorten that bridge, but you can make it longer. And that's important to recognize. You can't shorten it. Like your body has to go through the process, address everything, but your body has to go through the process of healing. But you can definitely slow all of that down by trying to get back right away, get back too early. You know, some people had seen that I posted about my hernia surgery, and some guy messaged me and he's like, oh man, I'm getting a hernia surgery next week. Do you think I'll be able to grapple in a week? I said, have you lost your mind, dude? Like, I couldn't sit up in a bed, like grapple. I wouldn't want someone like literally touching my body. And even coming back, it was slow at first. I didn't want to like let someone in my guard right away. I kept trying to put my knee in front of my body and shield them. And then little by little, I'd let them through. And I'm like, wow, it actually doesn't really hurt. So it even took some time for me to even build that confidence and trust in my body again too.
Yeah, it's you know, you get some people that become mat addicts and they have to be mindful about that stuff because they want to come back way too soon.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
Going back to something you said earlier, right? So I found that I worked with a coach, a nutrition coach, for one of my weight cuts back in 2020. And I remember, you know, went on this diet, and it wasn't like any sort of like very strict diet in the sense of it doesn't have a accepted name like a carnivore or vegan or whatever, right? It's more just like, we're going to eat whole foods. We're going to eat this in certain amounts, whatever. We're going to eat for performance, not necessarily for just pleasure all the time, although you can make the food taste just fine. But one of the things that I noticed on the diet, and I told this to him, was like, besides the fact that I was losing weight and I was improving the composition of my body, I was like, I don't hurt. Like for instance, my hands, you know, I think it's mostly genetics, and then jiu-jitsu just didn't help, but I've got like these big knobby knuckles, but like my mom had these big knobby knuckles, right? So there's a genetic element to it. But if like I go and eat a bunch of crap food for a weekend, you know, my hands will be so stiff, and it's like, they don't feel good, right? They just hurt. And I noticed that, you know, this was in my mid 30s. I started eating this diet, and I told him, I was like, man, the best thing about this diet is, like, my knees, which I've had 2 surgeries on, one on each knee. I don't feel anything in my knees anymore, and my hands don't hurt. I was like, this feels amazing. Like, I feel great. Like, this is awesome. And so I was wondering for you, because you kind of mentioned that, and I think that for a lot of people getting into jiu-jitsu, since they're not athletes, there are people that just live normal lives, whatever, and they're sedentary at some points, and they come into jiu-jitsu, they're a bit out of shape. Most people's diets are a mess. And I think a lot of people would do amazing things for themselves if they got on a good diet that cleaned out, like you said, mostly just get rid of a lot of the processed garbage and get focused on eating whole foods that you actually have to make yourself. What kind of, do you follow any particular diet, or was there anything in particular that you noticed that seemed to move the needle for you in a positive direction in regards to diet?
I think diet's a personal thing for everybody. For me, like, I've been vegetarian for like 25 years now or something like that. And I switched to vegetarian because I was having a lot of gut health problem with meat. Like, I would get really sick every time I ate meat. Like, it really bothered my stomach really bad. And it's interesting because the second I stopped, and I don't think there's anything wrong with eating meat. My entire family eats meat. I'm the only one that doesn't eat meat. And I think it has an importance in some diet for people too. But for me, like, meat would make me sick. So I stopped eating meat. I even went to vegan for a while. And I know a lot of people love being vegan. I didn't like being vegan. It got me so thin and so skinny. You know, like right now I'm about 180. That's kind of my normal weight. Being a vegan, I was like 150, 155, which is, like, that's just too small. And I was getting hurt all the time. So I got away from the veganism and just, you know, I do seafood, and that's pretty much it in terms of like actual meat. But I keep my diet. I eat most of the same foods every day. Like, I eat super, super clean. We cook and prepare all of our own food. My wife, like I said, she's a black belt, but she's also a black belt in the kitchen too. And she's
Very nice.
amazing at preparing food. So I keep my diet really, really clean, mostly beans, greens, and grains. That's kind of my go-to. And that's what my stomach can handle. I have like some IBS and some stomach stuff. So if I even like stray outside of my diet, I can get like an IBS attack, and I can have all kinds of kind of gut issues and things like that. But it really goes, and I don't have those attacks ever anymore because I keep my diet so clean. So I think the biggest recommendation I could have for anybody would be to get rid of all the processed food in your cupboards. Like go home and like clean out the cupboards and do a complete reset. And I think most people actually really intuitively do know how to eat. They just have been, cheap food is cheap. You know what I mean? Crappy food is cheap. So it's better. Say that again.
I said, and it's easy.
And it's easy, right? So learning how to prepare your food can be so empowering on a level of learning how to prepare food, but also on an internal level too with your own body versus eating out can be fun, but I don't know, sometimes I see the person who's preparing my food and I wonder not just physically what they're putting into my food, but mentally, what are they putting into my food? They could be having the worst day ever and just hate their job. And now I'm literally consuming what they're giving me. So eating out less, cleaning out your cupboards, eating no crappy processed stuff, and eating good quality whole foods can make a huge difference in your life.
Yeah. Then when you find what works, and then you have a consistency to it, you know what to expect when you eat. How your body's going to feel.
Right.
If I eat meat, I'm going to feel crappy. Or if I eat this specific diet that you have, you're going to feel good and your stomach's going to feel good.
And consistency is the key there. I always say consistency unlocks potential. It unlocks the potential of your food too. So, but consistently approaching it from it, not like this thing where well, I'm going to eat healthy Monday through Friday, but I'm going to eat like shit on the weekends.
Yeah.
And I tried that before, and I hated the eating like shit part because I felt like shit. It was fun for the first couple of weeks. You're like, oh, this is so fun. Let's go out and get pancakes, and you do all this crazy stuff, and then you're just paying for it for a couple of days, and it doesn't really support your time on the mat either. Like a lot of times, you might have a student who comes to class and he's like, oh God, I feel so exhausted and tired rolling, and I have no energy. And I'll say, well, what did you have to eat today? Well, I didn't eat anything today. Well, did you have water? Did you have any fluids? No, not really. He's like, well, you're not bad at jiu-jitsu. You're bad at living.
Yeah.
That's just crappy living, dude. You're living like a 17-year-old man, right? Or worse. Or I ate Taco Bell for lunch.
Yeah.
And then I didn't eat anything for the last 6 hours, and I haven't drinking anything today other than coffee.
Right. Yeah.
And they're telling you that their jiu-jitsu sucks. It's like, no, your lifestyle sucks. You need to fix your lifestyle, and that's going to fix your jiu-jitsu too.
Yeah, it's like driving a car, trying to drive a car that is running on E that hasn't had an oil change in 50,000 miles, right? Don't expect great results when you're giving this biological machine of yours nothing to work with.
Yeah, and you're
or
treating
giving
it
the
like
wrong
that
things.
too, right? Think about that. We talked about this conversation with your body again. Going back to that, how are you treating this high tech, once in a lifetime machine that is going to break down if you allow it to break down, or it could last for a very, very long time if you take really great care of it and actually, have some pride and ownership of this machine that you've been gifted.
Yeah. We were talking about sort of cheap food, and I think cheap food sometimes, or bad food, junk food, processed food can be cheap, but I think sometimes it's a lot of times becomes just easy. I think that's the biggest prize. It's so convenient, right?
Yeah, it's convenient. That's the challenge. So then again, going back to we talked about sabotaging yourself. Yeah. And again, these are all, I learned this from my wife. She will tell me to prepare something ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
I came today from teaching private lessons to going into this call, and I wanted to make sure that I had food in my stomach. So she'll help me get some snacks ready and have stuff that's easy to prepare for, having some oranges, fruit that you can take on the go, that you can down real quick just for a quick little energy boost. Always having some kind of hydration drink with you so that you can always sabotage yourself for success instead of sabotaging yourself for failure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's especially for anybody listening, I know we have a lot of people that are married or, living with someone. Whenever you do this, you really want to get both both people, both adults on board, right? Because
Yeah.
it's really hard to, I'm going to be on this diet. I can do it, but like if this is new to you and you haven't done this stuff, it can be very difficult to do it solo. And so like, now like my wife, like the same thing, like, we always have rice either cooked or it's in the rice cooker. We have sweet potatoes made. We have like batches of chicken or beef that can just be pulled out immediately.
Yep.
It's just ready for you. So like this way, when you get home and you're hungry and you're ready to chow down, and you don't look for something quick. You're like, I've got my food ready for me right here. And you can just do batches of food. And like, you do it like maybe twice a week and you're good to go. And it doesn't really take that long. Like I can spend, an hour or so, like twice a week, if that, and I'm good to go.
And getting all that crap out of your cupboard too. Like I call them my avalanche foods. So I'm like a snacker. Like if there's going to be like chocolate chip cookies around the house, that's going to be a big problem for me.
Yep.
So I stay away from my avalanche foods. Cause like, that's the kind of thing where like, and when are we going to want to binge? Probably like 10, 11 o'clock at night, at least for me. So it's like 11 o'clock at night and I'm out there digging through the cupboards. And if I can't find anything that's not good for me, then I'm not going to eat it. But if there's like some secret stash of cookies and like potato chips and crap like that, that's where my self-discipline might go out the window and that might become an avalanche for me. And I have to be mindful of that. So having stuff in your cupboards that you like to snack on that is like okay for you. Like I like little dried tart cherries. They're sweet, they're bitter. They're actually good to help you fall asleep at nighttime. I like the sweet, bitter taste of them. It's soury. That's a perfect little snack for me that I could go to the cupboard, take a small handful, put it in a little dish like I'm 4 years old, and maybe get an orange or something. And that's something that I can have at nighttime that I feel like is a kind of a sweet snack. And it's not going to sabotage everything that I've already did throughout the day.
Yeah. And that's important because again, there's the inflammation part of it. When you start putting a lot of processed stuff, there's different things in there that can create a lot of like inflammation in your body. But then even too, when you eat some processed foods, a lot of times they're very calorically dense. Right. And so when you eat calorically dense foods, you can ruin a whole training session with a candy bar, right? And I know people's Fitbits and watches say they burned 1,000 calories in the gym. You didn't burn 1,000 calories rolling. I promise you that's not how it works, right? Like you're not burning those kind of calories training in your average gym rolling. And so like, you get a hold of a candy bar or two or something like that, you start snacking, boom. All those calories you burned, you now have added on top of those because you had like a big king size Snickers bar or whatever. And, again, not that's, there's a time and place for that. If you want to have one once a week or something like that, that's cool. Make it a thing. Make it like, like me and my wife, we pick out a day of the week. We go eat whatever it is we want for at least one meal. We're going to go eat whatever we want.
Nice. Love it.
And that's fine. But again, you don't need to be doing that every single day. It shouldn't be a part of your daily flow, right?
Sure. Right. You've heard that saying, you can't out exercise a shitty diet.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's so profound because like, if you're doing that on a daily basis, if you're exercising on a daily basis and you're eating like shit on a daily basis, what's going to happen is those scales are going to start to tilt in the wrong direction. And so it's important to do what you said, to have like maybe like a special meal once a week, or my wife and I will go to Whole Foods and I'll pick out like a really good quality candy bar, like something that's like, like an expensive candy bar, and we'll go home and we'll break it in half and we'll just have a little bit of it and that kind of thing. But I feel like I'm getting that little bit of a treat that I like, because I like that kind of stuff, without kind of going overboard on it too.
Moderation, man. Moderation is super important. I mean, it's so huge. Like, I think you can do too much of a good thing and it may not be a good thing for you. So, I mean, I think moderation is so important.
Can't over fertilize those fields.
That's right. Yeah. I'm curious, man. So I always love asking this question when we've got someone that's been training since the 90s. So I'm curious as to how you discovered jiu-jitsu in 1996. What was it that inspired you to start grappling?
So like everybody back then, I saw the first UFC. I didn't see it live in 93. I caught it in a VHS tape. And I remember I was working at a Taekwondo school. Somebody gave me a VHS tape. It was the first UFC. I went home and I watched it like multiple times straight through overnight. Like one night I was like tripping balls on it. Like I was like, this shit is crazy. And at that point I'd already heard about the Gracies. I remember they had ads in Black Belt magazine back then. So I heard about this family and I remember reading about them and I was kind of curious about it. And there were like some kind of videos floating around. There were a few instructionals back then. And so initially it was just finding a few videotapes and trying to practice moves, but having like no clue what I was doing. And then one of my friends at the time, a training partner, calls me up one day and says, "Hey, I just signed us up for an MMA fight in Virginia." This is 1996. And I'd already been training martial arts for a long time at that point and had a black belt, like, traditional martial arts, but I didn't know how to grapple that well. Like, I'd wrestle with my friends and stuff, and we would try to figure stuff out, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And I took this fight and I fought against a blue belt in BJJ. He trained at the Samurai Club in Canada with Carlos Newton. And I didn't get submitted. We fought for 15 minutes, and then there was they said 15 more minutes. So we ended up fighting for 30 minutes, and I lost a draw. And it was like this weird rules where you could knee to the body and elbow to the head standing up, but then you couldn't do knees and elbows on the ground, and you had to do palms. It was all open hand. It was all these weird kind of crazy rules.
Okay.
But the silver lining of it was Mario Yamasaki from the UFC, UFC referee Mario Yamasaki. Yeah. Right. So he invited everybody down to his academy in Washington the next day. I went down, trained with a bunch of guys in jiu-jitsu for really the first time. So I always called that my first day of jiu-jitsu, because that was my first time really in a jiu-jitsu school, doing jiu-jitsu. And then I was hooked after that. I went back to my school. I had a part-time school in Delaware at the time that I was teaching at. I was running a little club in a fitness center. I had 3 mats, and I rented out a racquetball court for $200 a month. And I was teaching this weird mix of it was some grappling on the ground, some submission, some strike. And I thought I was creating the ultimate martial art. And I went back to my school and I said, "You know what, guys, we're not going to do that anymore. Everybody's going to get a gi, and we're going to figure out jiu-jitsu." And that was the beginning of it for me.
That's awesome.
That's cool. The old racquetball court.
I love it.
You're not the first. There's a lot of guys that were renting racquetball court space out back in the 90s and early 2000s.
Aerobic studios and all that kind of stuff.
The acoustics of teaching in a racquetball court are awesome.
Yeah.
It's this big echo over and over again.
Yeah. That's so much fun, man. I just love I was 10 years old when I first saw the UFC, and this was when was it? I'm 40 now, so it's 30 years ago. So I saw I was 10 probably. My dad brought home a VHS tape, and then just something that seemed to me so it's I could never do anything like that. I never fought professionally or had an MMA fight, but I just never, all that grappling just seemed so distant. I could never do that. And then getting into jiu-jitsu, it was awesome. It was just cool to see that and then start to experience it. It's whoa, this is incredible. The control you have and just the it's like a superpower. Everybody always says it's like a superpower. It's you don't know the secret that so many people don't know. It's just it's an empowering thing too, I think, to learn how to kind of at least protect yourself a little bit too.
And it's cool for our age to see that entire evolution of MMA. It's kind of shocking for me now. Sometimes I step back and go, wow, I remember being at a UFC back in the late 90s, 97 or 98. And they were oh, we're not going to probably have another one. It was ready to go out of business. At that point before they sold it. It's crazy to see it get so big now and see our sport so huge.
Yeah. And it's wild because, I remember when I first started training jiu-jitsu because I wanted to go fight, I remember talking to people just random people that I would meet. They would ask something about it or whatever. And, not really them not having any idea as to what I was talking about. And then I would say, well, hey, have you ever seen that thing where the guys fight in the cage? Right. And they'd be yeah. I was we'll take out the punches and the kicks. Right. So they didn't know what the UFC was. It was just they thought about cage fighting. And also back then, especially the early UFCs, there was so much mystique around those guys because, one, nobody knew what the heck was going on. And two, a lot of those records and a lot of the stuff was just embellished, right? They would say, when I think it was UFC 1, Ken Shamrock had just beaten Funaki in Pancrase. He had one match. He beat Funaki for the championship to be the king of Pancrase. And they called him the shoot fighting champion from Japan. And and again, with pre-internet, or early internet in the 90s, say whatever you want. Oh my God. I mean, it was just the shoot fighting. What is shoot fighting? Who knows what that is? And then, you had Tank Abbott. He comes into the UFC
or something.
And, Tank Abbott was in the UFC and they just needed a name for him. So they said he was pit fighting. Like,
Right.
you know, because all these guys were street brawlers.
Right.
What is it? Paul Varlins. They said trap fighting.
Polar
He was
fighting.
just, he had wrestled a little bit. It was like a friggin' frat boy that wanted to fight people.
Really?
Like, yeah, you didn't know there's no such thing as trap
The
fighting.
polar bear.
Just made some shit up. It was like they're playing a video game and they're like, we've got this character, we need to give him a style, right?
Well,
Like,
the record's like 100 something, like they would say like street fights or like 150-0 or something insane.
Yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
what the hell?
And even
150
like,
fights.
you know, anybody's record back then, even like Hickson, everybody, it was like 500-0. You know, they were just like literally making up numbers.
oh my God. If Hickson, like, if some guy looked at Hickson in the wrong way in a grocery store, I mean, like, and he like got him to punk up, there's a little tally to the
Yeah, there's
500
one more.
there.
That's right.
You know, I beat the guy without having to fight him. That's jiu-jitsu. Boom.
That's
Right there.
Yeah,
It's
even
just-
like the instructionals back then. I remember there were instructionals by blue belts that were like Brazilian.
yeah.
Like a blue belt on a video teaching jujitsu was like, and it was like jujitsu gold to watch.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I've been training 16 years now, and my coaches were purple. Well, I had a black belt coach for a short amount of time, and there was purple and blue belts that coached. You know,
Yeah.
until I went to Chewy's gym where we had black belts like consistently coaching. It was blue belts. I mean, really. And it's just like, and you're like, they were, as a white belt, blue belts were untouchable. Or you can pass their guard. I remember passing the guard of a blue belt for the first time. I was like, holy shit. You know, it's just like the levels, there was such a larger distinction, I think, between the belt ranks, I think, back then, because there's just so few of purples and browns and even blue belts. So like, I think it was just an interesting time where now I think, you know, you've got blue belts beating black belts now. Like it's all kind of the belts, I think.
Yeah. And even competing back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I remember going to a tournament in Canada and I'd been grappling like 3 years and I had Marcio Fatosa in my division as a black belt.
Oh, wow.
And I was a white belt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember like looking at this guy, I was like, man, he looks really tough. He's got like a crazy gnarly ass beard. You know what I mean? Here's this black one. I went out and got like submitted in like a minute. It was terrible.
Marcio Fatosa, he was not terrible at jiu-jitsu.
No, he was pretty good. He was pretty good.
Yeah, that's awesome,
funny.
man. Well, I want to ask you as well, like the idea of BJJ After 40. What was kind of how did that come about? You know, how did you come up with that, and what's the goal of BJJ After 40? Like, and has that mission changed at all over time?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. I've tried to make it less about me and more about the community, and so that's kind of what we tried to grow in the last few years. We have a private Facebook BJJ After 40 group, and it's a great little community where people can go and ask questions and, you know, about their training. And it really, the impetus of all of it was, you know, when I was 42 was there wasn't like really a whole lot for anybody that was over 40 doing jujitsu. So it started out as just like a name, and I was like BJJ After 40 and just started putting out content and articles and blogs and stuff like that. And it just has really organically grown on its own. I've never, you know, paid for ads or anything like that. I've always just kind of let it be what it is. And it's a great place for people to learn more about jujitsu, to learn more about best practices for over 40, over 50 and beyond. We've got guys in our Facebook group. There's a guy, Gary Parrott. He's like 73 years old or something.
Oh, wow.
And he's got a tournament coming up. And he goes,
That's cool.
There's nobody in this division, dude. He went into an adult division a couple of years ago and he didn't win, but it's pretty cool that he did that. And I give that guy a lot of credit, man. That's a pretty ballsy move.
That's right.
Well, the fact that you can even do that at that age and like walk away from it and not feel like you got completely wrecked or like you didn't get injured. Hopefully you didn't. But
No.
like even the ability to do that. Imagine getting in like you're a 70-year-old man getting with a street fight with like a 25-year-old. Like,
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's over, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not obvious there's no strikes, but like even just the ability to do that and kind of make it through a match is impressive.
And the After 40 community it's the biggest growing community in the jiu-jitsu world right now because jiu-jitsu's never been bigger, and everybody that trains is going to be over 40 at some point. And you want to be able to train, you know, you don't want to go through 15 years of jiu-jitsu, get your black belt, and then be a complete absolute physical wreck at the end of it and not be able to do all of the cool stuff that you've worked so hard to attain.
Mhm.
And I'm big on helping people trying to create that path for themselves so that they can continue to do it and it can become a sustainable practice. And it's literally the best thing for someone over 40 and 50. Where else can you go and hang out with like other dudes your age and girls your age and people your age that are interested in something that you're interested in? And it's something that's so unique and different, and then wrestle with each other and like have a good time and build a really high quality social network, which is something that's really missing in the world.
Sure.
You know, the suicide rates for men right now over 40 and 50 are the highest that they've ever been. And it's important that men specifically have a place to go and unwind and express that, like that warriorship within them, and be able to do that. You know, my dad went to like the Moose Club or something.
Sure.
We don't really go to the Moose Club anymore. That's not what people really do. And a lot of people don't have like maybe like a faith-based thing or go to church or something like that. So jiu-jitsu can fulfill that social aspect for them, for someone over 40. It's great for our brain. It's great because it allows us to build our neuroplasticity and new neural pathways in our brain, which is awesome for somebody who's getting older. So yeah, there's so many great values for it for anybody over 40.
Yeah, I
Very
agree with that. I think especially like having a tribe of people, men have always gathered in little gangs of groups, right?
Sure.
Like, and so again, having something that's like a productive gang to get together with, right? It's very useful rather than either, you know, street gangs or, you know, drinking too much at the bar or whatever, right?
Right.
Like you're around, you know, but men are going to congregate in groups of men. It's what we do naturally, and we'll do it in a very unproductive way, or we can have structured ways that are very productive. Kind of along that same line, since you were talking about it, how can people find you if they want to get a hold of you online or kind of see what you're up to?
Sure. They can go to any of our social media sites, BJJ After and the number 40. And you can also go to bjjafter40.com. And that's kind of our main hub where all of our links to our social media and all that stuff is there as well.
Awesome. And when's your book come out, Mike?
Well, probably right about the time this podcast comes out, because it's right in the final kind of stage of it right now. It should be out probably by Monday or Tuesday next week. So it'll be out here in the next few days.
Very cool. And then, just share some links where people can get it. And then appreciate your time, brother.
Well, I appreciate you guys. I've been a fan for the longest time. So I'm kind of geeking out a little bit, honestly, a little fanboyish here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of your people. So this is really great. And I really thank you for that.
I appreciate it. It was a pleasure chatting with you. You know, it's like a lot of times, like, you know, there's different guys out there in the jiu-jitsu creator space, whatever. So it was fun chatting with you. And it was a fun conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that podcast with Mike. That was fun. Again, I shared this earlier. Like, I really enjoyed that conversation. I don't know what you expect sometimes from people.
Yeah, we didn't know like what
I don't know
what
anything
Mike would be like.
Yeah.
And he was great. I mean, he was very much tons of like actionable and like tangible tips and ideas and stuff that, like, if you're a beginner or if you're over 40, like, do you want to, you know, take some really good pointers, like this is worth your while to listen, you know, obviously, and take some stuff down, take some notes while you're doing it.
Well, and it's interesting to hear someone who's been in this stuff for a long time, who's, you know, I feel like all jiu-jitsu sort of the roads lead to the same places. You know, both technically and sort of philosophically, right? So like a lot of times I've come up with techniques that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And then I will go watch an instructional video from like a really good jiu-jitsu practitioner like Marcelo Garcia. This has happened before. And, you know, here I am thinking I came up with this thing, and then Marcelo Garcia was doing it like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, we're just on the same roads. We're just getting there in different ways.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the philosophical ideas too are kind of similar. Like, for instance, his idea on, you know, treating yourself as a martial artist, not just a hobbyist, right? It's not that, you know, I am a martial artist, and so all my life should reflect this, versus, oh, I just do this thing on the side, you know. And I think that's kind of a distinction that's important, because it's like, say, you know, I am on a diet versus this is just how I eat.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that's a big distinction, because a diet's like, well, this is temporary. I'm on a diet, so I'm going to be temporary, versus, no, this is just how I eat.
Yep.
This is forever. Right. And you want to find those kinds of things that make your lifestyle sustainable. And like you were saying, be a martial artist, like your lifestyle outside of the mat is going to have such a huge determination on how good you get at this stuff. Because think about it, like, you're in the gym, maybe let's say 2 hours a day. If you're training hard, maybe 4, somewhere around there. Right. Like, okay, well, then that's what you're doing a day. What are you doing the other like 22 to 20 hours a day, right? Like, that's going to have a huge determination. How's your sleep? What's your diet like? Are you drinking a lot? What's your food intake? I mean, there's all these things that add up to decide, like, okay, how are you doing? Because again, your body is the machine that navigates jiu-jitsu. What kind of care you take to it is going to determine how well, you do in jiu-jitsu. This is why, like, you know, if you don't get a good night's sleep, sometimes you come in, you're like, I feel like crap. Or if you need enough food, like Mike was saying, you're not going to perform well. You know, or even if, you know, you're just, you add the factors up. Like he was saying, like, you know, he's one of the guys is like, man, I feel terrible today. I've had those conversations with so many people. They're like, man, I feel so terrible, or I'm about to pass out or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you know, what'd you eat today? Right. And it's like, oh, I didn't drink enough water. I didn't eat any food. Or sometimes it's like, I drank, you know, some energy drink right before training. Bad idea. So anyway, that's the ideas. Again, I really enjoyed the conversation with them. Hope you guys did too. Big thanks to our sponsors for making this podcast happen, to bring my bearded voice to your ears. Eugene's got a beard too, so his bearded voice. He didn't always have a beard, but
well, when you shave the old dome, you better have a beard. I used to have like a little goatee action.
Yeah.
It was pretty awesome. I remember
the bald head, the shaven head with the beard looks kind of, it's kind of the thing.
Dude, I look like a cue ball. I don't know if I could, I don't know if I could shave the beard, man. It would be really weird. I think my kids, since my son is 8, he's going to be 9 in October. I think they've seen me without a beard one time. So it's been,
Daddy, no, cover it up.
My daughter liked it actually. My son was like, you know, they get used to it, but you look I look different. I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's more intimidating if I have a beard, right? I look more manly and more buff and rough, and you know, that's kind of thing. That's why I do it.
You know, back in the day, like back in like another time period, it would have been the mustache that was considered like, whoa, like
the
back,
mustache.
back in like, say, like the Roman times, right? Like that was like a big distinction, like where, you know, the Romans would shave and they would typically grow their beards out during periods of mourning.
Okay.
But like all of what we would consider air quotes barbarians, right? People that like, you know, Germanics and Celts, they would typically have these big elaborate mustaches. And that was kind of like, that was a sign that they, you know, what they were. They had these mustaches, and there was a period in Rome where some of the Romans would wear the mustaches because it was kind of like, ooh, like they're you know, they're bad. They're wearing, it's kind of like almost like tattoos or something. Right?
Really?
Oh man, he's wearing a mustache, right? You know, it. But yeah. So anyway, random thought about facial hair there, but you know, just you can even go look at like some of the depictions of them in like Roman history and stuff. You'll hear about the mustache.
I never put it past you to add some kind of historic spin on our conversation. It's never a podcast until Chewy adds some kind of like historic element of the Romans or whomever that
did you see that video that was going around where it was like some girl was like asking her like boyfriend, like, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And he was like, I don't know, like you know, twice a day or something. Like, you
I've
know,
never seen it. That's you, dude.
Yeah, it was like
you?
it was like a lot of guys. All like, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
Think about Roman Empire. You know, like I don't know if I think about them that often, but I think about I think about things in historical terms a lot because I just think it's
like history. You know, in some ways repeats itself, and there's a lot of lessons in history and a lot of things we can learn from it. And just
I don't think history itself repeats itself, but like again, you know, with humans, you know, we're essentially no different than we were like 2,000 years ago. We have access to different technologies, but like, you know, it's like the hardware running us
on the cellular level. We're about the same.
We're the same, bro. Yeah. We're the same people that have been walking around the earth for a long time. So our technology is evolving, but like the body isn't, right? We're not unless they start strapping maybe some technology into us that does some stuff, but we're not evolving that fast. And so we're essentially the same. And so the fundamental like root cause to a lot of human things is the same.
Or kind of like you're saying, so like the fundamental.
So like here's an example.
We have.
Here's an example in jiu-jitsu, right? Like off balancing someone is off balancing someone, whether we're doing it from side control bottom to off balance them, whether we're doing it from a half guard, a butterfly guard, standing. Off balancing is off balancing someone, right? We're bringing that person into an off balancing position so that they're no longer able to move, or then we have initiative of what's going on, right? Yeah. That's always the same. It's the fundamental undercurrent that makes that happen. So like you see these undercurrents, right? So like you see these mass movements that pop up, right? Whether it be like fascism in Germany or communism in Russia or in China or whatever. And it's like, well, the fundamental cause is the same there. You know, or like when you watch these battles, these big giant like blundering battles where like this general makes a mistake that's been made. I mean, like you look at like for instance, everybody knows about, you know, in Russia, it was like the you know, Germany going and trying to invade Russia. Okay. Yeah. And then we know that Napoleon, right, that he tried to invade Russia. And then like same thing happened to him, right? Like, because it was Napoleon started it and then Russia started it, and Germany tried to do the same thing, failed, right? But they weren't the first, right? Because then if you go back into, because like Sweden used to be like one of the top European like military powers.
Really?
Yeah. So like they were like one, like because they standardized a lot of like, because a lot of the weapons and things like that that they were using at the time. And so I think it was like Charles the 15th or something. So like he has this army, they have a little war up in Northern Europe, and then he decides he's going to go take Russia with about 40,000 something people. He sort of thinks of himself as Alexander, who basically took over the known world with about 45,000 men, right? And I think this is, I forgot which Russian czar was there at the time, but you know, he gets in there and goes through, and like he makes it pretty deep into Russia. Same damn thing happened to him. So he was like the one that, but most people don't know about him.
Yeah.
They don't know about Charles the 15th. I think it's Charles the 15th. I could be wrong about that, but it was a guy, it was the ruler from Sweden, who at the time Sweden was like one of the powerhouses, which most people don't know that one. You don't think of Sweden as like the military powerhouse, but like at the time in Europe, they were taking care of business. So anyway, just random stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Chewy.
Enjoy your fun history fact for the day. Thank you guys for being here today. Big thanks to our sponsors, Charlotte's Web, for making CBD oil. That is really awesome. It's third-party tested to ensure the purity of it. And they make a really good product that eventually when the stuff gets FDA regulated, they will be perfectly fine to be able to deal with it, where a lot of CBD companies will not be, because they're like making it out in their bathtub, and you don't really bathtub CBD. They don't really know what's in the supplement, right? And again, they make a lot of cool products. Check out their website at charlottesweb.com. Browse through it. If you find something you like that you would like to try out, use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. And again, try out some of their CBD oils, some of their balms, something like that. And again, try it for yourself and see what you think. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Epic Roll, epicrollbjj.com. My buddy Matt, black belt jiu-jitsu practitioner himself, makes it for other jiu-jitsu practitioners. He's out supporting young competitors that are coming up, that are trying to make it with something, trying to, there's the old saying of like, that I heard a marketer talk about, like, you always put something back in the jar. You always put a cookie back in the jar, right? Where everybody's taking stuff. We all take a little bit from everything, right? But we want to try to put something back. And so again, that's when you're doing your contribution. You take and then you give back. And he's obviously, he's done a lot of stuff, but he's obviously taking this stuff, making a business out of it, but he's also giving back to a lot of people in the community. I like his stuff. I get my no-gi gear made through him. So if you want to check out any of his stuff, go to epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. And guys, if you want to join our Patreon, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. You guys know how Patreon works, right? Like, I'm sure not telling you anything new. We have a bundle of content that you can get access to. And in return for that, you give us a very small pittance. It's like, I think it's equates like 25 cents or 30 cents a day, if that. And so again, you do that, and then obviously it's a normal, you're not paying that a day. Like, you're not going to see those charges every day. Like, it's like what, $7.
We're going to email you and say, hey, give us a quarter.
It's there to support the podcast if you want to do it. And again, if you join up, then obviously we'll give you some stuff to get access to and some bonuses. And but you can check it out at patreon.com/the Chewjitsu podcast. And guys, last but not least, if you would like to get my daily email, subscribe to it by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. When you join up, you'll get access to a couple free ebooks that I give away for free, including a video that comes with it, that should help you with your jiu-jitsu and help you improve in jiu-jitsu. Along with that, you will then get my daily email that includes everything from, jiu-jitsu training tips, diet tips, strength training tips, that kind of stuff. Also, books that I'm reading, philosophical stuff that I think is really interesting that I like to share. Probably going to be a random history fact in there from time to time, not going to lie. And then also too, I will share offers with you at a discounted rate or special bundles and things like that I don't offer anywhere else. And a lot of other stuff that, again, I don't do anywhere else, because I genuinely enjoy the communication through email a little bit better sometimes than, say, comment section where it turns into like a fight, or I don't spend a ton of time on social media. So sometimes if you send me a DM, I may not get back to you, but if you send me an email, I generally get back to you a little bit quicker than those, and if I do it all. So again, if you ever need to get a hold of me, email is also the best way. And so guys, with that said, thank you for joining. Oh, and last but not least, if you guys are in the Chicago area, November 2nd and 3rd, we're taking the Jiu-Jitsu Open, and we're going to be going to Chicago. So you can win if you're watching the video right now.
Oh boy. Man, he did it.
If you were watching the video, you can see this pretty shiny belt. You can win one of those.
I've got one, and I won it. Nobody gave it to me, so there it is.
He won it. The promoter did not give it to him.
I did not. I was not handed one.
But again, it's a really cool tournament. If you have details about it, you can check my stuff out to find more about it. It's a round robin style format where you get lots of matches. You're guaranteed multiple matches, And again, we have a master's division set up as well. So if you're a little bit older, like after 40 crew, we got you. And again, it's priced reasonably well, very affordable. And then at the same time on Sunday, so the tournament's on Saturday, on Sunday, I'll be doing a seminar, a workshop type thing. So again, if you guys have never trained with me and you would like to, then that would be a good chance to do it in Chicago. So November 2nd, 3rd, hope to see you guys there. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you next week.